Welcome back to another episode of The Road Chose Me. My name's Dan Grech, and today a topic that lots of people are asking me about: what about using electric vehicles for overlanding? So what's available today? What's going to be available in the future? What are the downsides? What are the upsides? And what do I personally think about this idea? Can you drive around the world in an electric vehicle? Let's get into all the details right now. Today I'm talking about pure electric vehicles, so there is no gasoline or diesel engine. These are only batteries. And the prime example is the Teslas. They kind of have the biggest market share right now, but there's quite a few others out there that you can buy right now too. Ford have their kind of smaller SUV thing. For some reason they called it a Mustang, even though it's an SUV. Kia have options, certainly Audi have options, and VW are about to bring out their big EV as well. So these exist today. You can buy them, you can drive them. Lots of them have 200, 300, maybe even 350 miles of range. I don't know about where you live, but around here in Canada, charging stations are popping up all over the place. Even here now in the winter, I see them every day driving on the winter roads. They're going up the mountains to the ski resort. So they certainly can work really well for getting around. In terms of going on an overlanding trip, I think the options that exist today, they can work really well if your type of overlanding is kind of more like state parks or staying in paid campgrounds and not really much off-roading. Certainly some gravel roads are going to be fine, maybe even what I sometimes call Subaru roads. You know, Teslas, they have a four-wheel drive version. A couple of the models have air suspension, so you can even raise them up to get a bit more ground clearance. They're certainly not designed for off-roading, but a little bit of gravel isn't going to hurt them. And people always wonder about charging them. You know, what if you want to drive up to Alaska? Well, actually, plenty of people have driven the Alaska highway. You can totally do it in a purely electric vehicle. And you might ask, how is it possible to charge though? Well, it turns out there's a really nifty thing. State parks in the US and paid campgrounds all over North America, they always have plug-in service at each campground because of all the people driving their big monster RVs. And a lot of them, they even have a sign out the front that says 50 amp service. So 50 amps is saying, you know, the amount of electricity that you can get right at your campsite. And luckily it turns out 50 amps is a great amount of power to charge your electric car. So if you're driving the Alaska highway, you could easily drive the 300 or 400 miles of range you've got in a day. Then when you pay for camping, you'll also get the electricity you need to charge. You'll be back to full capacity again for the next day. And there are campgrounds every 50 or 100 miles on the Alaska highway, so it's no problem at all. You could roam all the way up to Fairbanks. You could actually drive to the Arctic Circle if you were careful about where you charged and back again. No problem at all. You really can do that today. But certainly, if you want to get really remote in Death Valley or you want to drive the Mojave Road, I don't know that the electric vehicles on the market today are very good for that. Could it be done? I don't know, maybe. Would I want to do it? No, I don't think so. That's where we want to talk more about what's coming. And there's a lot of exciting things coming very soon, probably later this year in 2021. But in 2022, the big explosion is coming. So Ford are going to have an all-electric F-150 pickup. Tesla have got their Cybertruck coming out. Love it or hate it, it's going to have really good range and it is going to be real. Bollinger have got their pickup truck coming. Rivian will have their RV1 thing coming out. And I was actually able to check out one of them when I was at Overland Expo. So pretty soon here, we're going to have a lot of electric vehicles that are really designed for going off-road, which I think is fantastic. In terms of how do they compare to regular off-road vehicles, they certainly have a few advantages. One of them being the underside is entirely flat on these vehicles. Because it's just a battery, there's nothing hanging down, there's no pumpkins, there's no suspension down there. And so for off-roading, that flat bottom is going to be really great. As I mentioned, lots of them have air suspension. So get to an obstacle, raise the suspension as high as it'll go, drive over the obstacle, and then if you want good range again, you can just lower it down. Another great feature is lots of them will have multiple motors on different wheels, which means the four-wheel drive is going to be really interesting. So I won't be surprised if they have some sort of software diff lock type feature where the engines will just turn the wheels no matter what's happening traction wise. In that way, it'll be a lot like the diff locks in my Jeep. You will have genuine four-wheel drive where all four wheels are spinning. Instead of, as soon as where one wheel lifts in the air, it just spins and the one on the ground doesn't turn, like in a regular diff. Another interesting feature, and this is on the new Hummer electric that they announced. They had that really slick launch video that showed it doing all kinds of cool things. It actually has front and rear steering, which means it can drive on a diagonal, which is going to be really nifty for getting around obstacles. Kind of a cool feature that we haven't seen yet in the off-road world. So I think it's going to be really interesting. All of these electric pickups and sort of SUVs that are coming out, they're not just going to be as capable as our current four-wheel drives, but then made electric. They're also adding features to make them better, to make them kind of like 21st century off-roading. And I think this is a really good thing. It's really interesting. Another thing people always ask about is, can you charge them from solar panels? And while that would be the holy grail, it would be a little bit like going around the world in a sailboat. You actually get transport for free. The sailboat from the wind, the electric car from solar panels. But it turns out the physics just doesn't work to our advantage. So the amount of energy an electric car needs to move is astronomical. It's way more electricity even than the heater in your house uses, anything you've ever plugged in or used before. So that means you need a huge amount of solar panels, many, many, many square yards of solar panels to really charge your car at any reasonable speed. And Elon Musk talked about this recently on a podcast, and he said, even if we cover the entire Cybertruck in solar panels, you might get 20, maybe 30 miles of range in an entire day of it sitting in the sun. So that is interesting. It's better than nothing, but I don't think it's ever going to work where you just drive during the day and the amount of sun that you're getting on the vehicle means you just get to keep driving. Solar panels are just never going to work like that. Another option that people think about is, what if you tow a trailer that's covered in solar panels? And well, yeah, maybe. I did actually follow for a while. There was a couple, they had one of those electric RVs. There was one brought out for a while, a full-size RV that was all electric. And they covered it in solar panels. They had solar panels that fold out, that slide out, that you carry out. They had more solar panels than most industrial factories have. And I remember chatting to them, and they were planning to drive the whole Pan American, and they said if they had a full day of sunshine, they could get about 60 miles of range. So what that meant was leave it in the full sun for an entire day, don't drive anywhere, camp again that night. The following day you could drive for 60 miles, and then you had to leave it sit again for a whole nother day. So possible, yes. Very practical, no, not really. And actually, last I heard, they gave up on their trip and they're no longer driving the Pan American in that electric vehicle. But certainly I think if you're staying in the developed world, charging stations are being built faster than ever before. And by the time these pickup trucks are really being mass produced, be that next year or maybe even 2023, I think charging stations will be common enough that you really can use these things to go and explore the remote parts of California or Nevada, or as I said already, you can drive up to Alaska and back. So that means electric vehicles, they already do work quite well in developed parts of the world, and certainly with what's coming in the next couple of years, I think they're going to work better and better. And there's no doubt about it, they're cheaper to drive per mile. So if you are looking at a long trip around the US, an electric vehicle will be cheaper than a gas or diesel vehicle. So that's true if you stay in the developed world, but what if we look at going internationally? Well, and that's where I think we're going to start having problems. So the first concern is, how do you charge these things? And so there certainly are websites where people have inputted where there's like public charging stations all over the world. Mexico has a ton of them. They even have Tesla superchargers. But countries all over the world, they call it plug share, where it's basically someone's loaning you a charger, or you can pay a little bit of money and they have like a high current plug-in where you'll be able to charge at a reasonable rate. So it's possible, but in between those, there's no doubt about it, you're just going to have to charge from a regular wall outlet. And yes, it can be done, no problem at all. Reading around online, people who charge their Teslas that way, they get about 5 miles for every hour that the Tesla is plugged in. So that means if you're driving the Pan American, if you're in Nicaragua and you just camp on the beach in some campground and they have, a rusty old outlet on the wall next to the tenting section, absolutely you can plug your Tesla in. If you leave it plugged in all night, you get there at 8 p.m., you leave it plugged in till 8 a.m., you will have gained about 60 miles of range. That's it. So realistically, you're going to have to wait an entire day where the vehicle is just plugged in before you can drive again. So you can maybe have a driving day, then a rest day, then a driving day. And actually that works pretty well. That's sort of what I did on my trip. I'm not in a hurry when I'm on the road. So it certainly, I think, can be workable. Again, is it super practical? Not really. If you do want to put in a really long driving day, maybe that's not going to be possible just yet. But again, countries all over the world are developing way, way, way faster than we can imagine while we're sitting here. And I do believe the electricity grids will keep getting better and the options will keep improving. And if you're driving across the Congo, it's going to be tough to find fast charging, but most places, if you're careful, you will find electricity. And if you're willing to wait a day or 3, you will be able to charge your car and get on the road again. So I think charging, it's an issue, but it isn't actually a deal breaker right now. Probably though, the bigger concern is, what about servicing and what about maintenance? So if you're out in the Congo, or even if you're just in Nicaragua, I think the real challenge is going to be, what if you have problems with your electric car? So sort of like when cars were first invented, if you drive them really far away from people who know how to work on them, you're going to have problems because nobody's ever seen anything like that. And certainly Teslas, and I think all the other electric cars coming, they are extraordinarily computer controlled. So essentially any fix is going to need the diagnostic computer from the dealer, which basically means if you're in a country that doesn't have a presence from that brand, whether it's Rivian or Tesla or even Hummer, I think you're going to have a world of problems. The local mechanics, yeah, they'd be able to put new brake pads in for you, no doubt. If you have a problem with it that's sort of like a regular car problem, like a flat tire, I think that's obviously no problem. But if you have any kind of problem with the computers or the battery or the electric drivetrain, that's going to be a really big problem. And so the question is, when will it be possible to go globally with an electric car? Well, I think it's just going to be, at first, it'll be the brave people who sort of push forward, like the ones who took vehicles to places where vehicles had never been before. Someone has to go first, and they're kind of taking the risk of, well, if we break down, that's just going to be a headache to solve. But then slowly over time, more and more people will do it. Countries will start getting those electric vehicles more locally. Dealerships will be equipped. And so they will slowly spread around the world. The question is it going to be 5 years before you and I can roam Southern Africa in an electric car? Is it 10? Is it 20? I don't really know. I don't have a crystal ball, but I do feel like this is one of those technologies. It's going to be a bit like the iPhone, where at first it sort of feels slow and it sort of feels too expensive and people are a bit skeptical and like, yeah, I don't know, it's kind of cool, but what I've got already works. But then suddenly there's some sort of tipping point, and all of a sudden, within I think a year or 3, the vast majority of vehicles in the developed world, they're just going to be replaced with electric vehicles as soon as they can start building them fast enough, just like with the iPhone. And at that point, they'll start getting pushed out into developing countries as well, and they'll all expand and it'll become more and more popular around the world. So I personally think that tipping point is coming within the next 5 years, certainly within 10 years, I feel confident that we'll be able to roam a lot of the planet in electric vehicles. But, who knows? Like I said, I don't have a crystal ball. And so to wrap up, what do I think right now of electric vehicles? I mean, I think they're really interesting. I'd kind of like to get one to try it out and, experience these pros and cons for myself and see how annoying it is to charge if I drive up to Alaska or somewhere like that. But certainly next year and the year after that, once we have all these different options of legitimate off-road four-wheel drive electric vehicles, that I think is going to be extremely exciting. And we're going to see people do all kinds of things like the Trans-America Trail. We're going to see people roam down into Central America. And that's where we'll really start getting information about how useful they are if you want to go global. But I think very exciting times, and I certainly am interested. And if I had the money, yeah, maybe I'd buy an electric vehicle just to find out how well they work. So those are my thoughts on electric vehicles for overlanding, and I'd really love to hear your thoughts as well. As I said, I don't have a crystal ball. I feel like everyone's kind of hedging their bets right now. Even the pros who write for the big automotive outlets, they're all sort of a bit unsure, and they're all sort of saying, yeah, it might be really good, but we don't know, let's wait and see. So I'd love to hear, what do you think? What are your thoughts on, can electric vehicles work for overlanding? And how soon is it before they really explode and they actually start to become more common than what we think of vehicles today? So if the video has been helpful, if you've enjoyed this, leave a comment below, let me know your thoughts, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and as always, I'll give a big thanks to my supporters on Patreon. They're helping me bring these videos to life. So I hope you've enjoyed, thanks for watching, and until next time, maybe I'll bump into you on the road.